Hans Christian Andersen once said, "Most of the people who will walk after me will be children, so make the beat keep time with short steps."
Well, welcome to Season 1, Episode 1 of Bright Hearth podcast. My name is Brian Sauvé, and I am here with my lovely wife, Lexy Sauvé, and our baby, Winnie. Say hi.
They'll probably hear her at some point.
She's
taking the mic.
She's eating right now. She's at the mommy buffet. So
Nice.
we figured it would be appropriate for her to join us here for Episode 1 because the Bright Hearth podcast is all about making productive homes. It's about recovering the lost arts of homemaking and the productive Christian household. Hence the name Bright Hearth. We're trying to make homes that would be warm and inviting and also bright, as in, think about Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount when he's talking about what Christians are to be like in the world. They're to be like this city set on a hill. It's all lit up with good works so that the nations would look and they would see our good works and they would glorify our Father in heaven. And so much of those good works are related to the home. They're going to come out of Christian homes that are walking in obedience to the Lord Jesus, that understand what those homes are for, where they're pointed. Amen, Winnie? That's right. That's right. You tell them. Those homes are going to understand what they're pointed at within the mission of God, what each member is for, how they relate to each other, and really putting on display the gospel picture that is the Christian family coming out of Christian marriages. So this first season, we're going to be focusing on, very practically, those lost arts of homemaking and the productive Christian household. And our plan is basically to walk through the different rooms of the house as we, focus on different elements of homemaking that relate to those rooms of the house. That's not original to us. I know there's other books that have used that idea, but I think it's a helpful way of organizing your thought as you think about homemaking. But why don't we start in this episode, Lexy, by just explaining what we mean when we say homemaking? What do we mean when we say that word?
One of the things we talked about previously was that homemaking is a specifically feminine task. It's not given to men, no matter how much stay-at-home dads want to think it has been given to fathers, or feminists want to make it that way. So I think it's also something that's given to all women, all females of any age or stage or season of life. I know we'll talk about this, and we have talked about this in other places. But if you're single, you're a homemaker. If you're a single woman, you're a homemaker. God has made you with a particular domestic bent of some sort.
Yeah, Paul, I think one of the foundational texts that we might look at as we're thinking about this is in Titus Chapter 2, where Paul is very practically, he's teaching Titus, who's going to go and plant a lot of churches on this big island of Crete. It's like 100-mile long island. And he's basically saying, as they're setting up churches, train the pastors to train the people to look like this in their households. And he says, as for you, teach what accords with sound doctrine. Older men are to be sober, dignified, self-controlled, sound in faith, in love, and in steadfastness. So he's giving some gendered piety here. He says, verse 3, older women likewise are to be reverent in their behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. They are to teach what is good, and so train the young women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled, pure, working at home, and that word is oikodespots. It's like a manager of the house, kind and submissive to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be reviled. So there's something about homemaking, apparently, that it's so important that if the young women and the older women aren't working together to make sure this happens, that the word of God might actually be reviled.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that it is a vocation given from the Lord. It's not something we get to choose to walk in or not. It's a God-given task, and it's made up, homemaking is made up of all of the small necessary tasks that are needful in order to love the people in your home and your community well. Practically, it looks like laundry. It looks like food. It looks like making the beds. It's much more than that, though, but those are all of like the really, really practical tasks. And I think it's important to note that what you're saying about that word, being a worker at home, that's such a strong word for authority in the home, and it's so strong that Pastor Wilson actually says that the husband is to be considered a guest in the home because the homemaker has such a strong place of authority. And I like to bring that up because I think a lot of women can become martyrs in the home instead of managers of the home, where they start to complain. they start to fuss at their husband instead of realizing God's actually given me authority. I can make decisions to make my job, my life, my home easier. Not in the sense of like take the easy way out, but is your husband not getting that project done that you want? Are you going to fuss at him, or could you just hire someone to do it? Or could you learn to do it? Be a manager in your home instead of a complainer and a martyr in your home.
So she's managing the household to make sure that all of the tasks that God has given to the household would actually be completed. And I think that's a good note about the relationship between the husband and wife's authority in the home, because the husband is the head of the house. He's the head of his wife. And that means that he is, functioning in the home kind of like a general, where he's deploying his troops. He's making sure that God's tasks for their household are being carried out. And then the wife is kind of like his first lieutenant, and I'm probably using the incorrect hierarchical terms in even though I'm a military kid, I should know this.
Yeah, you did do this recently, that I had to correct you.
I should know this, but the wife is functioning kind of like his deputy, where he's making sure if he's doing his job right, it will be very clear to the house. This is the mission of our house. Mm-hmm. This is what we're trying to accomplish, the target we're trying to hit with our house. And so here's how my wife is going to see that vision out in the home. Because often, he's going to be out pursuing his vocation, which is different, provision, protection. And so he's going to be going out of the house to bring resources into the house. She's going to be there managing all of these practical elements of the household. So what do you think, what are some of those domestic arts, just practically, so people have an idea of what we're talking about? What are some of the domestic arts that a homemaker might aim to master that goes into that task?
I think it's really different from what a lot of Christians are talking about nowadays, because we are specifically looking at productive households.
Yeah.
And we're looking at decentralized local churches, which makes the skill set different for the husband and wife in the home. So for me, you will hear a lot of people talking about, teaching young children, cooking food, providing clothing, decorating, but you're not necessarily going to find someone who's saying, hey, young girl, maybe you should go learn how to slaughter a pig. Or maybe you should learn how to sew your own clothes. Or maybe you should learn how to gain some mental stamina to deal with really, really hard work and hard seasons of pregnancies back to back.
Yeah.
And though it's just different when you are a household, and part of the reason we feel strongly about this is because there was a marked difference in the household. I think it was as of 1933. George Grant was just talking about this. That was the first time in history that I don't remember which branch of the government it was, but they started to literally call your household a factory. You were a driveway with a factory. You were no longer a household, because they knew that productivity was now outside the home. So prior to 1930, they still understood that the economic basis of a household was in the household, but it was so centralized at that point that it was basically just for entertainment. So the lost arts that we're going to be talking about are things like basic care of the sick, productive property that you or your husband might be pursuing. Homesteading is one. Titus 2 relationships, living intergenerationally. A lot of those types of things, either the mental or physical organization really does hinge on the homemaker.
Yeah. Maybe it'd be helpful, too, if I ask that question again, centered around some of the rooms of the house. And these will be like big headings that we'll come back to throughout the season as we really focus in. But so maybe what are some domestic arts of the kitchen that we need to recover?
Okay. Yeah. So like canning, making your own pickles.
That's good.
Hospitality, just having people in your home instead of going to restaurants.
Or buying prepackaged food or all prepared.
Yes. And those it's not like a sin issue necessarily, but you can see there are drastic worldviews at play. The, what would you call it? Not the food production industry, but like grocery stores. The feminist movement hinged on there being grocery stores. So feminists could leave their kids at daycares, go to work for the day, pick something up fast that's already made, and take it home to feed their kids.
Yeah.
When I see that that's what's going on, maybe it's my rebellion. I don't know. I want to fight against it with everything in me. And so I make bread or waffles or, you know what I mean? So, yeah.
Yeah, and you might even think, so one thing that we'll try to hit, I think, throughout this season of the podcast is to thread that needle well when we're talking about issues of wisdom and fighting back against the spirit of the age in a way that the household has been under attack without anathematizing anybody who uses a cake mix.
No.
You know, we're definitely not going to do that because we understand that as we recover these arts, you're not all of a sudden tomorrow going to have a fully vertically integrated home economic relationship where, you know, from the food, you know, where you're growing all your own medicinal herbs and you're doing, you know, but we do want to help point and say, what's the next step? Yeah. Not to condemn you ladies, but to help, you know, to say, maybe you haven't thought about this. So the kitchen, some things like, canning and food preservation and food production and how to bake from scratch and some of those arts. What about as we're going into the medicine cabinet? You talked a little bit about, you mentioned basic care for the sick.
Yeah. Just knowing, like not having to rely on the government, again, on hospitals, on doctors. The household used to be the place where doctors would come to care for people. It wasn't having to go to a hospital that was immediately increasing your risk of sickness just by walking in the door. They would come to you, or grandmas and aunts would come over and care for the sick or care for the postpartum mom or help you deliver a baby. You know, or literally sit with you on your deathbed. Like deathbed hospitality is a huge thing that I'm passionate about, Christians recovering.
And now we just have hospice care that
now we just pay the professionals to do all of this.
And we pay them like $200,000 for 2 weeks of end of life care.
And we wonder why moms are so lonely. Yeah. And why they have no support. And I think that's something that Christians don't want to admit because they want to say, just, you know, correct your attitude. But really, I think there's something systemically wrong. I don't think we are designed to be alone all the time. And I think one of the big things that we could recover is just taking care of more people in our home. Yeah,
that's good. So we're talking about basic care of the sick, and again, this is not medical advice. We're not telling you don't call 911 when your kid is choking on a Lego or something. But we are trying to say, you know, before the Industrial Revolution and the industrialization of medicine and the centralization of care for the sick to just big depots where people are treated kind of like cogs in a factory or units on a conveyor belt, and basically where we're just saying let's treat symptoms with a lot of drugs, and that industry is connected to government, is connected to food, is connected to everything. And what the solution to that isn't like one thing. It's not like let's pass a law about, you know, drugs. It's let's actually recover human scaled households.
Human scaled.
Where people are loving one another and caring for one another and doing so skillfully, where they know, you know, moms know how to treat the top 20 or 30 common ailments that they're going to see in kids. And they know also in their church who to call when they I don't know what to do. I've got this rash on this kid and they're this old. And man, how helpful is it when you have intergenerational
I love that about our church, is that we have it all the time on our women's thread. Women are always saying, hey, I think this is what's going on. There's this one tricky symptom. What do you guys think's going on? And how would you treat it? I know it saved our family hundreds of dollars.
Absolutely.
So
we even have, and it's kind of a shame, but we even have like a neighbor who's not a Christian, who is an older woman, raised a lot of children, and we're in Utah, so big families even outside of Christian churches because of the Mormon church are common. So we've knocked on their door and said, "Oh, we need help with this," and the older woman's come over, and it would be wonderful. And I think we're growing in that as a church, and would like to see that continue. Winnie's doing her best to try and unplug some vital sound equipment to disrupt the podcast. We love Winnie. The podcast exists for people, not people for the podcast. So we don't care if Winnie ruins the recording. Okay. And the fact that you're listening to this right now proves that she didn't. If you are listening to it, she didn't unplug it in the middle. Okay, so we've talked about the medicine cabinet, the kitchen. What about let's say the bedroom, which is one of the first rooms we're going to talk about? What are some domestic arts related to the bedroom that need to be recovered? And I'm raising my eyebrows suggestively.
Fertility.
Fertility management understanding.
I think honoring the marriage bed, and along with that, honoring your fertility, and just the fact that God again, God gave you a set number of years to your fertility. You don't need to rush out and have somebody break you, if you will. Or something else we talked about, making babies in bed, having babies in bed. I've had some babies on our bed before.
You have. And yeah.
And people used to also die in their beds. Those are all because our household was where the productive economy was oriented, and we don't have that anymore.
Yeah, it's a shame that so much of the movement that's recovering fertility awareness and body awareness is like deeply feminist.
Oh,
it's such a shame.
On and on about
I know.
this.
We'll talk about that.
Yeah, we will. We'll talk about a lot of this.
Here. We'll talk about fertility. We'll talk about the honoring, like when we're commanded by the author of Hebrews to honor the marriage bed, keep it holy. So we'll talk about sexual relationship. This isn't going to be like a PG-13 podcast or anything, but talk about that aspect of homemaking.
You can contrast it too with what are most bedrooms for. Watching television until you fall asleep and maybe occasionally having sex.
Yeah, right. So a Christian bedroom, it's funny because maybe you haven't thought about it like this, but every room of the house should be treated differently if we're Christians, right? Christian bedrooms should be different than the bedrooms of the pagans, and that's definitely part of it. So what about thinking through different rooms of the house? Let's take like the living room, because you just mentioned television. Are we like telling everybody to burn their television completely, or what are some domestic arts related to the living room, that common life?
I was thinking about this earlier, and I was thinking as a homemaker just about the fact that we are kind of the gatekeepers in our home for truth, goodness, and beauty. And a lot of, at least in our home, a lot of the education of our children has happened in the living room.
Yeah.
In addition to just hanging out or having people over, playing games and stuff like that. But, reading books together. We do watch stuff with them. Doesn't monopolize our time though.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll talk about, catechism, family worship, prayer.
We have a lot of real art,
singing
in our living room. We're bringing a lot of real art back into our home. Yeah, beauty. Like, what are the things that are catechizing your kids? To me, when I think about that part of the home, I'm thinking of the living room.
Yeah, absolutely. Like when your people are in the home, what kind of beauty are they seeing? What's on the walls? What are they singing? What are they hearing? What are they eating? What are they, in the kitchen table's one related to this as well. Domestic arts of setting the table and getting the family to really have let me put it this way, making the hub of the home, in a sense, the dinner table, the table where breakfast and lunch and dinner, we're getting together in the family, and we're really, because of you, Lexy, because of your homemaking, the table can be a center. If not for you, it would be very difficult for me to do that as a husband. So we'll definitely talk about that. Let me ask you this. What are some ways that our culture has rejected the woman as homemaker, or lowered our cultural view of the homemaker? And what has resulted culturally from that lowering? Like, where did that happen in our history? Where did we start to lose this, and what's resulted from that?
Like, for real, what happened?
Yeah, in history, What happened to the homemaker? And how does our culture view the homemaker now as opposed to what they ought to?
I think the Industrial Revolution and World War II are two major turning points in history. The Industrial Revolution specifically because the husband factories kind of came into being as inventions, became bigger and bigger. It made mass production more easier. Men could leave the home to work in those factories, which took the woman's job of orienting her mission towards her husband. That's kind of hard to do when he leaves the home. It's not impossible.
Yeah.
It is kind of hard to do, though. So she didn't really have anything to do at that point.
Right.
Then comes the vintage housewife era.
Yeah.
Along with World War II, where the woman, and we have actual marketers. You can read books like Rebecca Merkel's Even Exile talks about this. So does that book. Was it Salt, Fat, Sugar?
Salt, Fat,
Salt, Fat, Sugar, I think.
Yeah,
talks
something
about
like
it.
that. It was talking about big food.
Okay, yeah. But I think it was in that book, and also Radical Homemakers, where there were marketers who were literally trying to figure out how to make it so that women were transitioning from being...
It's okay. You hear that baby
Women.
crying. Daddy wouldn't let her pull the plug out of the wall, and she says my patriarchy is toxic. She says, "Get your toxic patriarchy out of here, Daddy." Telling me what to do with my body.
Should I start over?
No, you're good. Just keep going from where you are.
Okay.
This is Bright Hearth podcast, baby. This is homemaking. This is real, raw, relevant. Sorry, Levi,
It's okay.
Let's go.
So they were trying to figure out how to manipulate the bored housewives.
Yeah.
They knew that they were no longer producing goods in the home. Their husbands were doing that in the factory. And if we're made by God to actually be workers and have vocations, I personally can understand why they were so bored.
Oh, yeah.
So along comes the automobile. A woman now.
She can zoom around anywhere.
Yeah, she can do whatever she wants. And they were literally studying her so that she could go be a consumer.
Right.
So they were marketing cars. The husband had a car to get to work. Now she needs a car so she can go be a consumer so we can sell her goods. She's not making goods. She still needs goods. We're going to sell them to her.
And the internet's made that even more powerful.
Yeah, the internet has made that more powerful. So I think that was like, as humans created in the image of God who want to work, it was an accurate problem that they were bored, but it was the wrong solution. The other thing was World War II.
Mm-hmm.
Women had to go work.
Yeah, all the men, this whole generation of men went to war.
Yeah, they had to go work. And then so many men died during that time that when they all came, the most brave, the most masculine, there was a much larger disparity in the population than ever before. Usually there's a 1% difference, and I think it was something like 15 to 20% more women now. So
especially among certain ages.
Yeah,
childbearing ages.
So they're thinking like that's where we got Rosie the Riveter, right? Isn't that from that time period?
Yeah, which by the way, we'll have a sweet T-shirt. I'm just gonna plug this right now. Just shameless.
She's
marketing.
even wearing a head covering.
We've got Rosie the Riveter telling you to feed the patriarchy.
Yeah, it's gonna be great, guys.
Just check. I don't know where it's gonna be at this point, but you'll be able to check that out at some point.
But you can see where the bored housewife then, same time she's going off, she's seeing she can actually work really hard outside the home. She can make a difference not only in her community, but in the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So she's not going to come home. She's not going to want to come home. You know what I mean?
That's right.
So, yeah.
That's good. And again, like as with medicine or with food, we're not telling you, ladies, sell your car to, go home and be like, the podcast told me we got to get rid of our car. That's not what we're saying.
No, I
we're
didn't
not
even
saying.
think about
that. A lot
that.
of this are society-wide changes that are, you can't undo them. You can't hit you can't hit Command Z and undo these societal changes. Like the whole community was transformed around the automobile. So it used to be you had walkable human-scaled communities, hashtag Wrath of Non. And now what do we have? Well, we have mega industrial. You have to drive everywhere. So again, the solutions we're going to put forward are not going to be one size fits all. They're not going to be ham-fisted like get rid of your car and just tomorrow start LARPing as Little House on the Prairie, because we don't have the intergenerational work. We don't have the cultural infrastructure. We can't just do that. We're going to have to live in the time, and God in his wisdom put us in this time. And so he wants us to demonstrate Christian households here.
And I think more than anything, I just want people to question, not in a deconstruct your faith sort of a way, but just because there is no neutrality. Yeah. I just want them to know why what's happening is what's happening so they can say no when they genuinely need to say no.
Right. Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. And that was really good. That actually, there were some things you said that helped me think about that in new ways, like the disparity in the men and women after World War II and how that's affected our culture. So let me ask you this. What are some of the garden variety sins that women will deal with that might keep them from being cheerful and fruitful homemakers? What are just some of the garden variety? Like you got to pull these weeds daily, weekly, monthly, if you're going to be a fruitful Christian homemaker.
I think envy is one of the biggest ones with women.
Yep.
And it kind of manifests itself in different ways, like envy of somebody else's gifts. Maybe somebody genuinely has a, I don't know what the word is. They just are more naturally domestic and creative. Okay. So, sorry. So somebody else might have had a mom that put her in daycare all day and was raised by a single mom. And so she's going to more naturally despise, she's envying her friends' gifts, but she's going to despise them and abdicate and do nothing about it.
Like, we don't need that. You're just LARPing as a trad wife.
Correct.
And it's envy that's doing
it's
that.
It's envy. It's also, I think I did that early on. I didn't have a growth mindset about my skill set, but I remember sitting on the back steps of our house in Ogden, listening to Misty Winkler talk about turning a profit on your talents.
Yeah.
And I remember just being so efficiency minded that I didn't want to try and turn a profit because I was scared that I was going to waste your money, your resources, make a mess in my house.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't going to turn a profit on any of the gifts that the Lord has given me. But I think that envy comes into play when you see, maybe you're being honest, maybe God has really only given you one talent and he has given your friend 3. But that's to his wisdom, and you're still called to turn a profit on it. I think the other thing, maybe this is envy, I'm not sure what this is, but women can despise one another, and they can, you've gotten it before. Like, well, your wife makes sourdough. That's legalism. No, maybe she genuinely has a hobby where she loves to make bread.
Yeah.
Or, some of my other friends are great at knitting. I am not good at that.
She's making the most adorable noises behind you. That's a great point. People can tend to dismiss the pursuit of rigor or excellence or wisdom as legalism sometimes.
So it's like laziness, envy.
You're making all the women feel like they have to get up at 6 a.m. Correct. You're such a legalist.
I get that.
Where's
all
the Bible
time.
verse that says you have? Well, here's the deal, ladies. If you have multiple children and you want to get ahead of your day and you want to have a cheerful house, you might have to get up at 6 a.m. or earlier.
Yes.
And it's not legalism. It's just saying, like, here's some, in the same way that I might say, hey, you should wear your seatbelt, or you should not drive 150 miles an hour down the freeway. Like, there's no verse on that either.
It is entirely different. When you, as a woman, part of my vocation is food.
Yeah.
When I'm trying to do that vocation well, I don't get to sleep in until 7 o'clock and put Eggo waffles in the toaster. Right. I just don't get to.
And it doesn't mean, again, that if there's a hard night and a kid's up that, and you put Eggos in the toaster or whatever the equivalent is for us.
We had cereal this week because we've had colds.
And even we'll talk about that, like being prepared. When we talk about the kitchen and the table, we'll talk about being prepared for the wrinkles in the plan. Because we don't want to make perfection. There's another sin. Let me add one. There's a sin that I think is common to homemakers.
I think that was me, was the perfectionism part of it.
The perfectionist, that the plan becomes what is, everybody exists to serve the plan now, instead of the plan exists to serve the people. This is the first cousin of the error where the home becomes like, oh, we're all about beauty in the home. So if the kids touch anything, there's going to be hell to pay.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's not a Christian home. Where there is no ox, the stable is clean. But it's by the strength of the ox that the produce comes in.
Yeah.
So we're going to need to balance some of these things. What about, I think, a common sin, as a husband, and I'm not saying like here's a common sin that my wife's always doing or anything like that, but just I think a common sin as a pastor of households and things like that comes up quite a bit, or it comes up as I'm applying the scriptures quite a bit, is just like I think you mentioned, how did you put it at the beginning of the podcast? You talked about instead of being a martyr, instead of being a manager, they become a martyr, where it becomes like a suffering competition between the husband and the wife, where she's like, oh yeah? You had a hard day at work? Well, I got up at 6 and I helped the kid. Do you know how many times the baby was up tonight? Or, I think one of the common temptations for a wife, a homemaker, might be that martyr complex, getting in a suffering competition with all her friends. Like, oh, you had a hard night? Well, I have 17 children with a cold. And 4 of them were vomiting. And it's like, it's not a competition.
I know. I tell my friends on a regular basis, like, look, guys, we're all tired.
Yeah.
We're all tired. There's no reason, like... And they all get it. They all get it. We're all mature about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What's your question? You're saying it's about the husband?
Adding that to the sins of the home that are common for a homemaker. I think one of them is that martyr complex, where she's just, because she's doing hard work, she's tired, and then instead of being tired and cheerful, she becomes tired and bitter, or tired and a martyr.
I think part of it too is you're fundamentally looking at being tired as a problem.
Oh, right. But it's not.
That's not a problem.
That's a good point.
But a lot of times, I don't know, maybe this isn't true, but I do think a lot of times women not taking dominion well results in them being more tired than they need to be.
Right.
Or not Sabbathing.
Yeah. That's true.
Again, because they're not doing their job right the rest of the week.
Ahead of time.
Yeah, and I'm not saying we're not working hard to earn our Sabbath.
Yeah.
But there are very little simple things that you can put into practice.
Yeah.
Not to tie up all the loose ends, but so that you can Sabbath.
Absolutely. So you're not, and this is true of men and women, every vocation is like this. If you're continually playing catch up on everything and you're not planning ahead and you're not working with wisdom, you're not ordering your day and being disciplined and exercising dominion properly, you're just always going to be harried and frustrated and running to and fro. And that's where something like this podcast or older women or older men that can counsel you and say, here's some practical helps to just order to get ahead.
I was listening to some, what are they called? Like the IGTV, I think, videos a few weeks ago on kitchen efficiencies. Yeah. And she was talking about like a typical a business floor, I guess you could say. They understand you're never looking for 100% efficiency. I think they're only ever aiming at like 80%. But she said they also understand that if you go over that max capacity, like let's just look at the days of the week. If you're working 7 days instead of 6 and resting 1, that overtime that you're working, you're only at, I think she said 60% efficiency.
Yeah, you actually go down.
Yeah, you go down.
You get less done. That's good. So this is the last big question I have. And so let me give an introduction, then I'll ask your thoughts here, because I think it's very important for husbands and wives together to understand this, that homemaking is not just something that exists as like a random Christian duty on a list of random Christian duties. All of our Christian duties relate to the Missio Dei, the mission of God, the way that branches relate to the trunk of a tree.
Yep.
So the Missio Dei, the mission of God, is the glory of God, but it's specifically to cover the earth with the glory of God as the waters cover the sea. This is a promise that you see throughout the Old Testament, that the glory of God will cover the earth as the waters cover the sea. And one of the key ways that that's going to happen, you see this theme unfold from Genesis to Revelation, is that God is going to cover the earth in his image bearers, particularly his redeemed and renovated image bearers, conformed to the image of Christ, this new humanity, that are now restored to proper relationship with God in his new heavens and new earth, that images his glory, covers the earth through fruitfulness and homes and having children and discipling them, and his faithfulness through the generations, as well as the conversion of the lost to the discipleship of the nations to obey all that Christ commanded. And the home, when you start to think about the mission, man, you see how absolutely tectonically central that home is to that mission. Because the home is where people are. The home is where people are made. The home is where people are raised. It's where they're fed. It's where they talk. Most of our life is going to be lived in some vital connection to the home. So when we talk about homemaking, we're talking about something that is central to the mission of God. So do you have any thoughts there, Lexy, as kind of a last heading really in this episode of the podcast as we relate homemaking to the mission of God? Any thoughts there? Or
well, it just reminds me of what I've been trying to instill in Daphne, is that the household is for the people, not the people for the household. And as a homemaker, when we're talking about things like canning and learning to sew your own clothes, it's to love the people well. Yeah. It's not to show off your skill set as a wife. And I think you can tell, why are you doing it when those things go wrong? Like, what happens when you have a cold and you have to use store-bought cereal? When you're in your third trimester. Yeah. And you're eating Chick-fil-A every single night. Yeah. Like, what that kind of reveals, like, what is your household for? Yeah. You know, mom, Lexy. Is it a Tower of Babel for your own glory? Or is it a living stone or some living stones in this great structure God's building? And I think, too, Christopher Wiley in I never remember the title. Is it The Household in the War for the Cosmos? Yeah, have you read that one? Mm-hmm. Okay. He had a really good section there at the end where he was basically saying, I wish I could find it. I haven't quite figured out how to use my notes app yet, but he was basically saying, because the household is what the center of society is being held together by, that is where the enemy is going to attack.
Yeah.
no matter what.
Mm.
So I don't want to be manipulated by Satan. Like that's what
right.
I'm thinking.
That's right. Yeah.
Like literally, and this is where it comes. The rubber meets the road for me. I told you, I don't know if I can kill these rabbits we're going to raise.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm literally thinking in my head, I don't want to be manipulated by demons. I am mature enough to handle this. In Christ, I can learn a new skill set. I'm not scared of this.
Yeah, you can do hard things.
I can do hard things. I can bring a new skill set into my church. That's another cool thing is when you start thinking this way, you're thinking, how is this skill that I'm trying to learn going to serve those around me in my household as well?
Yeah, that's really good. Well, let me summarize some of what we've talked about in this episode as we wrap up here. We're talking about homemaking and recovering the lost arts of homemaking and the productive Christian household in this season of Bright Hearth. And we've said that homemaking is a vocation that God uniquely gives to women, both single and married, that includes all the domestic tasks necessary to love the people in your home and your wider community well. That homemaking is part of how God has chosen to use the unique feminine giftings, the way that he's uniquely made women to be, to fulfill his mission, the Missio Dei, to be fruitful and multiply and cover God's earth in his image. So we've talked about a lot of different arts that are going to be recovered along the way, things that have gone wrong historically. We've talked about homemaking is related to the husband's mission and the whole household pointed together for that Missio Dei. We've talked about how homemaking is for children, that the home exists for the children, not the other way around. And we've connected this to Titus 2. So throughout this season, as I said, we're going to be walking through some rooms of the house, talking about some ways that room can be productive and the arts that will be required to be productive there. But thank you so much for listening to this first episode of Bright Hearth. We hope that you'll share it with your friends. We hope that you'll give a 5-star review wherever you're listening to this podcast, Spotify, Apple, wherever you're listening to it. Go give us your most honest, soul-rending 5-star review. And we hope that you've enjoyed Winnie's contributions, baby Winnie's contributions here. Thank you, Winnie. Hi, baby. To this episode of Bright Hearth, God bless you. May he be with you. May your home be blessed and fruitful in this season.